Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Fellowship of Nanaimo. My name is Bill Wolverton, and I'm your service leader this morning. Whatever your ethnicity, theological belief, gender, sexual orientation, age, and everything else that makes you who you are, please know that you are warmly welcome in our community. If this is your first time with us, a very special welcome to you. If you're joining us online, please consider sharing your contact information with us. We'd love to welcome you to the community. Please ensure that you turn your cell phones off or put them on vibrate. It helps if you remember to turn them on back on after the service. We have a wonderful website, ufon.ca, that's ufon.ca, and invite you to check it out for more detailed information about who we are, the services we offer, and how you can connect with us. Our speaker today is Reverend Christopher Wulff. Chris is a fifth-generation Canadian Unitarian who most recently served as minister of the Westside UU Congregation, that's Unitarian Universalist congregation in West Seattle. We acknowledge today that we meet on the traditional territory of the Shnemic First Nation. As Unitarians, we are committed to the work of reconciliation required to address the harm done to all Indigenous peoples and their cultures by non-Indigenous peoples. We have much to learn from the Indigenous perspective, that the earth is the source of all life and that our responsibility is to honor and care for it. The image of lilies that you don't see on your screen are in memory of my mother, Dorothy Wolverton, who died 19 years ago last week. Now let us into sacred time. Patrick, our music director, will lead us into worship through music.
In fact, this morning we're all going to lead each other because we're going, for our prelude, we're all going to sing. Please rise as you're willing and able and sing together with me. This is Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. And the lyrics will come up there, but I think we hardly need them, do we? Here we go. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your ears to the song. Open your ears to the song. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Last verse. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in.
Today will be a joyful day. That is a promise that I hope will come to fruition. Good morning. My name is Christopher Wulff, Reverend Christopher Wulff. I'm so glad to be with you. It feels like it was a long, long time ago, maybe another age entirely, that I was last here with you. I'm delighted to see some old friends and some new faces and to greet old friends from somewhere else as well. This is great too. I'm grateful that I get to be here with you today and again in May and June to get to spend a little bit of time coming and talking with you and learning more about you. I want to tell you a little bit about what happens on Facebook each week in the world of ministers. Sometime Saturday morning, early afternoon, usually, a minister seeking diversion from the weight of what is to come the next morning, the weight of the empty page, starts something on Facebook called the Saturday Sermonator Roll Call. And throughout the day, folks check in on where they're at. They cheer on those who are struggling. They congratulate those who have finished. They share opening lines, readings, poems sometimes. And I've noticed that Easter is almost always the longest and most active and most confusing of the Saturday Sermonator roll calls. Folks are wrestling with Easter. They're never really sure what to do with it. They have their misgivings, they have their uncertainties. They are asking questions of like, how am I authentic to this holiday? How am I not appropriating this holiday in a way that feels genuine and true? And how do I wrestle with the nature of truth on a day that invites a miracle that a lot of us might question the truth of? There's an old joke amongst ministers that this would be the simplest way to test for suitability to UU ministry. Bring an aspiring UU minister into a room and say, explain Easter. If you can explain Easter in some functional way, I guess you'd be suited to ministry. I'm convinced that some of the reason that many UU congregations seem more full for Easter is that there are lots of people who want to come and watch the minister fumble through this, like, what the hell am I going to say about Easter? And personally, I don't think the fun and the challenge of that should be reserved for me. You could all lean into that as well. Spend some time today thinking, what is Easter to me? And what do I value from that story? And what do I know from that story? And what am I going to do with this holiday? So I invite you to answer those questions for yourselves later on today. The Reverend Daniel Budd, who's the UU minister in a church in Cleveland, Ohio, tells the story of one of his own Easter sermons. He was encouraged by his worship team, his worship committee, to place an ad in the local paper just before Easter, to do this as part of an effort to invite more people to come and draw more people into the service. And it was suggested to him that what the ad should say is something like, join us, we're not at all sure what happened. And so this morning's service is titled, Not at All Sure What Happened. This morning I welcome you, this community, this group of people, to this faith tradition where we're not at all sure what happened. But we know that, as with so many stories, it's not always the truth of the story that matters, it's the truth in the story. We're a community that knows that wrestling together with big questions, with uncertainties, is surely the better path than doing it alone. So welcome. Join us and let us come to the spirit of worship. I'm going to invite Bill now to come forward and light the congregation's chalice, the symbol of our faith, the symbol that connects us to folks around the world, this flame kindled over and over as the world has turned this morning. If you're online and have a chalice at home, I invite you to join us in kindling a flame. If you don't have a chalice, any old candle will do. All you have to do is give it a little love, invest in it a little bit of meaning, hold it gently. Let us light our chalice with these words. In moments of darkness, let this flame be a beacon of hope. In times of isolation, let this light be one shared between us all. When we feel lost, when we find it hard to touch, let alone hold to hope, may we remember this flickering light and how we each feel each Sunday when it is lit among us. This flame is kindled for you, whole and holy as you are. We're going to open musically this morning with one of my favorite songs, There Is More Love Somewhere, one of my favorite hymns. It's an African-American spiritual sung in Black churches for more than 100 years. What I love about the song, and what I feel like really connects it to our UU tradition, is that it doesn't proffer answers. It doesn't tell us where more love is. It doesn't tell us where more joy can be found, where more peace lives. Instead, it's a song of search. It's a song of yearning and of deep, desperate need. It rests instead in the assurance that one that our faith holds at its foundation, that when things are hard, that still there is reason to be hopeful. As the Brazilian poet Fernando Sabino said, and which John Lennon famously echoed, in the end, everything will be okay. Because if it's not okay, it's not the end. Our job is to keep on searching, to keep on moving forward, to keep on until we find it. Please rise and join in singing There Is More Love Somewhere.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy somewhere.
I'm going to go over here now, and I'm going to invite any children or folks who are young at heart even to come forward and join me at the front. If you are willing and able. It looks like you're going to come join me. Fantastic. Come on, take a seat. Do you want to bring a chair? Do that. You don't have to bring your chair. Any chair will do. Any chair will do. Okay. Actually, probably right more over here. I mean, well, no, actually here, you know what? Let's do this. Let's do this. We'll sit this way. You go, and then yeah. That, do we like that? Okay. Okay, yeah, fireside chat. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna have ourselves a fireside chat. So I have a question for you. Fantastic, that's what I'm hoping for. What do you think Easter's all about?
About new beginnings.
New beginnings, oh, I like that.
Or like, I'm getting excited, like thinking about what's going to happen next year.
Nice. Very cool.
That's what it's about for me.
Yeah. So I brought a bunch of symbols that we associate with Easter, and maybe we can figure out why these symbols are associated with Easter, and we can try and put this puzzle together in some way. Do you like puzzles? Someone in this congregation loves puzzles. I was just in the back. You've got a huge collection of 1,000-piece puzzles. So not only do you love puzzles, you're very patient and very diligent. And wow, estimable qualities, I'm sure. So the first one that I wanted to offer was the bunny. What do you think the bunny has to do with Easter?
It brings the eggs.
The bunny brings the eggs, right? So the bunny comes from old stories, old pagan stories of the goddess Westra, which is kind of where the word Easter comes from. And the bunny was the symbol of fertility, which was also her symbol. So that's where the bunny comes from. It's nice to be like, oh yeah, that makes sense then. Yeah, it's a season of fertility, of celebrating spring and growth. Yeah.
And what's fertility?
Well, you can come back for my owl class later on. Should we talk about that?
Lucas, do you know what fertility is? Abundance, something like that?
In this context, absolutely, yes. Yeah, the next symbol, and this is, originally these were all props that I had, except when I got onto the ferry, I discovered that my box of props was in fact empty. Later on in the service, it was going to be empty, so that makes sense, but it wasn't supposed to be empty. I have a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, and one of them was a little mischievous. So instead, I have these lovely photos. Symbols, still symbols, absolutely. What are those? Eggs. Why are eggs a symbol of Easter? It's kind of the same reason as the first one. Eggs have been symbols of fertility for a long, long time. People actually used to plant eggs in the ground to encourage abundant growth in their fields or in their families. Sometimes it was considered to be a good luck charm. Those eggs in particular, the very well decorated eggs, much nicer than mine, come from the Eastern European tradition, from the Ukraine and Poland and countries around there. Before those were really countries, but nonetheless. And the fascinating thing about these is that a lot of the patterns and things in them are family patterns, in much the way that Scottish families have crests and kilts, and the eggs of particular families and particular familial lines can be found in old Ukrainian eggs, which I think is pretty neat. Yeah. So, what comes next on my list? I think next on my list comes this guy. Are you familiar with that guy?
Nope.
No. Anybody familiar with that guy?
Yeah.
Who's that?
That's actually what Jesus really looked like.
Well done. Somebody reads the BBC News. Yes. Very nice. Very nice. So, if you were to go into many other churches today and to ask, what does Jesus look like? There'd be a picture on the wall, and he'd look a lot like me. He'd have long hair and a beard, and he'd be really pale, kind of pinkish. This picture is what researchers think is probably the most likely kind of amalgam of folks of that time, probably what they would have looked like being where he was from in his day. So, yeah, probably what Jesus looked like. Yeah. So the reason that Easter and Jesus kind of go together, do you know the story? That's not a familiar story to you? Okay. I wouldn't worry about it. So Jesus, the fellow that we celebrated the birth of just a few months ago, Easter is a big deal in the Jesus story. So Jesus is born. The Easter story happens about 35 years after Christmas, after he's born, when Jesus has kind of got 12 guys who are following him around, the apostles. And they're moving around, they're gathering more and more people to them with this message of like, you know what, the Romans say that only the Romans are good, but I think everybody's good. And I think God says that everybody's good, and we all are redeemed in God. And that's a pretty revolutionary message to be taking around at that time. Yeah. So Jesus is coming around and taking that message, and that's Jesus. So, you know what that is?
That's the cross.
That's the cross. So this is kind of the hard part of the Easter story, because Jesus doing all of those things that were about celebrating everybody and trying to undo imperial power was, of course, threatening to that imperial power. And that led to his being killed on what we call Good Friday, which the label doesn't make sense. And the cross is the crucifix that he was nailed to when he was killed, along with 2 other folks up on the hill that day. And so it's a continuing symbol that folks have as kind of the beginning day of Easter. Okay. So then, you know what this is?
It's a basket.
It is a basket. It's a symbolic basket. The basket is meant to symbolize a tomb. And the interesting thing about the tomb in the Easter story is that 3 days after Jesus died, his mom and a couple of other women went down to the tomb, to where he'd been buried, because they wanted to prepare his body for actual burial into the ground. And they got to the tomb, and they were on their way to the tomb and being like, how are we ever going to move the giant rock in front of the tomb? Yeah, let's keep going. We'll figure it out. And they get there, and it turns out the rock isn't there. The tomb is empty. Jesus' body isn't there. They're a little freaked out by this. They're a little scared by this. And they encounter somebody who comes to them and says to them, don't worry. He has, the man Jesus has died and he has risen from the grave and he is on his way to Galilee.
What's Galilee?
It's a place down the road.
Okay.
And it's what's really interesting is that if you're looking at the various gospels in the New Testament, in the first one, Mark, they're so terrified by this that they tell no one. And so the whole story could have just stopped right there. If they hadn't told anybody that Jesus had risen, there probably wouldn't be a Christianity. The next gospel tells a very different story, and eventually we figure out that either Jesus appears as an apparition on the road, or in the person of another person on the road, or whatever. But the story becomes that Jesus is risen again. Okay, and that was the empty tomb. And I think that the Easter story is an interesting one because, like you say, it's about new beginnings. It's about new possibilities. And so for me, the symbol that I always associate most with this season is not that one, but this one that we couldn't print very large. Can you tell everybody what that is?
No, I can't really tell.
Okay, maybe it's upside down. Is it better that way? Not really.
Oh, it's a butterfly.
Yes, it's a bunch of cocoons
Yeah.
and butterfly emerging. And this is, I think, for me, the best symbol of Easter because it's about transformation. It's about the going from one state to a new state, to going to a new place. And so that is kind of the Easter symbols. So I don't know, was that helpful? Yeah.
That's pretty helpful. That was good.
Cool. I'm glad. Okay.
Speech.
Yeah, well, thanks. Thanks. Yeah, we had lots of cool stuff to look at. You were a fantastic guest, I have to say. Yeah. Yeah, thanks very much. Patrick, can we get into our song now?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, as is our new tradition, we're going to sing We Hold You in Our Love As You Go, and do it in both English and in French. So the slides will be up in a moment. And please join me in singing. We hold you in our love as you go, as you go. May your heart be at peace as you go. To nurture the spark of your precious life, we hold you in our hearts as you go. Nous vous entourons d'amour maintenant et toujours. Que vos cœurs soient en paix pour toujours. Cultivons l'étincelle jour après jour. Nous vous entourons d'amour pour toujours.
So I noticed the singing out that you didn't leave, which is interesting to me because I understand there's some sort of Easter egg hunt happening. Just
For the kids and not the teens.
well, that's a raw deal, I'll say. I think I have some chocolate in my bag. See me after the service, okay? You're doing okay? Okay, yeah. Still eating Halloween candy. That's good. Okay. So Eric Walker Wickstrom, the minister, said the question is not whether we believe in resurrection, but whether we've known it. Known it in our own lived experience, seen it in the lives of others, felt it in the world around us. Persephone returns to the world of light. Osiris is resurrected by the power of the love of his wife Isis. The phoenix is born anew from its own ashes. Jesus leaves behind the tomb. Snow and ice melts, giving way to new life. The promise of our shared faith is the promise of the season and these stories. Winter is not perpetual. The wheel will keep on turning. The tomb is not the end. We affirm the promise of rebirth, of resurrection, of life's ultimate victory over death, of hope's triumph over hopelessness, not as an abstract concept, but as the miraculous reality of our lives. I invite you now to join me in a spirit of meditation, of prayer, of reflection. Please take a breath with me. In and out. And again, in and out. Spirit of life and of love, God of many names and no names, the force of love. Hear our prayer this Easter morning. As we roll back the stone covering the most tender places of our hearts, holding the pain of the world, of our own lives, the disappointment pushing down upon us with trembling hands and weary spirits. May we feel the light of love pour forth and know that we are not alone. May we feel the call to reach in and bring that love out into the world in full force. Even if we're not sure what that looks like, even if we're afraid, even if the world feels like it is breaking, the chasm widening, even if. May we feel the hope and possibility of new life, creation remade again and again and again with our help, with our hands and feet and eyes and ears, with our prayers and fellowship and justice making, with hugs and laughter, beauty and joy and tears, all of it tangled up together. May we find our way to be the light of the world, and may love prevail. In the name of all that is holy, we pray. Amen. Blessed be. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear the earth sing if you listen. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear the earth sing if you listen. 'Cause the sound of the river as it moves across the stones is the same sound as the blood in your body as it moves across your bones. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear the earth sing if you listen. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear the earth sing if you listen. 'Cause the sound of the river as it moves across the stones is the same sound as the blood in your body as it moves across your bones. Are you listening? Are you listening? Are you listening? I invite you to take a deep breath in and out. Thank you. We came in the darkness, a cold night when the possibility of spring still felt far off, no matter what the calendar promised. A classmate of mine in seminary had invited me to the congregation where they were doing their internship, Bloor Street United, one of the grand old stone churches, one of 9 in a 5-block span of downtown Toronto. Entering into that sanctuary, the lights were low but warm. As 2 of perhaps 30 people, we moved down the aisle and took seats a few rows from the chancel. 30 people in a space that the next morning would hold 500. But we didn't feel alone. We greeted our neighbors, opened our orders of service, the lights dimmed further, and the story began. The story of Good Friday and the emptiness of the day following the Sabbath, the day we were in. And as the story proceeds, the lights continue to dim until we found ourselves sitting in total darkness. That darkness that is meant to take us back to deepest despair, that darkness that is meant to take us back to that tomb in which lay a prophet killed for his treason against empire. to take us back to the despondent grief that his followers felt that night, as they too sat in deepest lament. Not long after we left the church in that darkness, not just of night, but of spirit. 5 hours later, I stood on the spit at Cherry Beach. A spit's like a peninsula, for folks who aren't familiar. I stood there with friends from Catholic Worker House, and they were there for a sunrise service. I almost lost a boot in the mud on the way, and the mud and the muck of the early spring field we crossed, which in Parker Palmer's world is like a world so wet and woeful you yearn for the return of snow and ice. It was one of those mornings. On the beach, we gathered, some few headlamps and lanterns still on as preparations were being made. And then the lamps were extinguished and the darkness returned. And in the darkness, the singing began, growing louder with each round, harmonies emerging and connecting, and the sky grew lighter with each verse, until over the edge of that great lake, the sun did rise. The woman leading the service proclaimed, "He is risen, hallelujah," and the proclamation echoed through the group. And so the miracle was felt in the heart. The story again told of life conquering death, of the resurrection of hope. Life conquers death. May all be resurrected with hope. May all rise in love. For some Unitarian Universalists, Easter is an opportunity to lean into a story that carries enormous power, of resistance to empire and redemptive love, a story from their youth that grabbed hold of the heart and would not let go in the face of all reason, even when all the rest of it had been released. For others, it's one of the most difficult days to reconcile with our faith, seeming to depend so heavily on a miracle in which we may not believe. And so we might be tempted to escape it by instead preaching of the wonders of springtime, of new growth, of seeds that had been dormant now coming to life. And that's true. Springtime is a wonder, and dormant seeds are coming to life, both in the natural world and within ourselves. But what of that story? That story that's been told every year for almost 2,000 years and which holds the hearts of so many. Explain Easter. It's tempting for some of us to shrug our shoulders and say, yeah, Easter, that doesn't mean that much to me, thanks. But the fourth of our 6 UU sources is Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors. Sorry, I said loving our neighbors as ourselves. That source asks of each of us a deeper engagement with those stories and those traditions, to not cast them aside. The 6 sources of our faith are not intended to be a place where we pick and choose one or two that we're comfortable with and discard the rest. It's a responsibility of our faith of Unitarian Universalist practice, of our spiritual call to remain open to and even seek actively within each of the 6. This morning, as we gather in what might feel like an unrelenting time of brokenness in our world, we're called upon to reflect on the audacious notion of repair, of healing, of renewal, of resurrection. For the record, I can't explain Easter. I'm actually not going to try. You're not going to get an answer by the end of the sermon, just to be clear. I'm not at all sure what happened. I'm not at all sure what happened in almost every respect of that story, in every aspect of it. And still I know that on those Easter mornings when I've risen in the dark to greet the sun, when I've gathered folks to do that, and as I did this morning, I've been often overwhelmed with hope. The Reverend Jane I'm going to say Zepka because I think that's how it's pronounced, writes, to some Unitarian Universalists, it matters whether the basis of a religious story is historical, factual. It matters to a great many people whether Jesus did or did not come back to life after he died. Not wanting to be duped is a healthy part of human nature. And if the central story of a religion can't be shown literally to be true, many, reasonably, are unwilling to base their life on it. But some Unitarian Universalists find merit enough in the Jesus story to find inspiration or indeed a spiritual foundation. For them, the objective historical truth doesn't matter one way or the other. What matters is the wisdom found in the long-standing legend. When a story offers a basis for hope, for health, celebration, and good works, why not call it a keeper, she writes. She ends with the words, "What matters is the wisdom found in every long-standing legend, every tale that we tell again and again." I found myself sitting in the pew that night amidst the loss, the sorrow, the distress. They were all palpable. In the darkness, there was so much sorrow. And I say this as somebody who's a religious naturalist and doesn't believe in the divinity of Jesus. And the story is not really mine, being a fifth-generation Unitarian, but nonetheless, it is part of our stories. It's part of our tradition, and one that we cast off out of our discomfort dangerously. That morning on the spit, as we walked in the dark, we were reminded of how the women had made that same walk, had gone to care for the body of their teacher, their rabbi. They found the empty tomb, they found the angel. They were told they would not find the living among the dead. And initially they were terrified. Actually, in all those versions, they were terrified. It's just what they chose to do after being terrified is the difference between them. In the Gospel of Mark, the first of the four Gospels, they were so scared they told no one. In Matthew and Luke, they go and tell people, and in the first, they're not believed because they're women. In the second, they are believed, and that's where the story really turns. On the beach, speaking the words, "He is risen," I know I'm not speaking of a literal rising from the grave. I hold to my conviction that Jesus is in fact not a zombie. I know that when I hear those words, when I heard those words in my heart, though, I felt some gladness. I felt the story giving me life, the promise of it, not a promise being made to me, but a promise of potentiality, a promise that in the world there is the potential for more. When we talk about being a community and a tradition of people, Theodore Parker's words, the arc of the universe bends towards justice. He holds that as a truth that lives in him, something he knows to be true without evidence. Like that is a power of faith. That the arc of the universe, that in time we will come to that place. We will come to that place of beloved community, of fulfillment, of wholeness. The metaphor of resurrection is incredibly powerful. And there's truth in many of the miracles we find in these teachings, even if they're not factual truths, that we're called to love our neighbors as ourselves, or better yet, to love our neighbors as themselves. Truths that resisting empire is necessary. Denouncing and undoing systems that put some above others is wholly just work. Truths that each of us, every human, knows what it is like to have grieved deeply a lost hope, a disappointment, or even to have felt like they were themselves alone in the tomb, in that darkness. After the loss of a loved one, after addiction, after illness, after depression, we have somehow returned to life over and over. We have found ourselves resurrected, and for some, it may indeed feel like it was a miracle. The story of Easter, the story of the resurrection of Jesus, is in some way, in my mind, a telling of the lasting promise of his love, of his ministry of caring and courageous witness, being alive still today, embodied in the lives of people who often, at great risk, stand with and speak up beside others in need, others who are vulnerable to harm or oppression, to abuse and neglect. And I say this knowing how, for so many, that story is not the story they are living in their faith. And that is not the story of the Christian faith, and is not the story that many of us have encountered with it. If we encountered Christianity in our childhood, and it is not the popular story of Christianity that is alive in the world today, and yet there are still people within that tradition who are preaching it. There are still people who claim and cling to the tradition that was Jesus's. Resurrection, which comes from the Latin resurge, means to rise up, and is in this way a trustworthy kind of promise and possibility in our lives, an intrinsic quality of our being, and our capacity to find ways to live through difficult, sometimes devastating experiences. There's a truth beyond our knowledge. There's compassion beyond our pain. There's a spirit burning brighter. There's a love to guide our way. That's the song they sing at the opening of every service from Sanctuary Boston, which is a young adult community of UUs in Boston. In Boston, obviously. Sanctuary Boston. I said that, yeah. Sorry. Miracles are, of course, not reserved for the Christian faith. In addition to today being Easter, we're also in the midst of Passover. We're also in the midst of Ramadan. Passover is the Jewish marking of the liberation from slavery, a story which contains its own many miraculous elements. My wife's father's family is Jewish, and each year we host a Seder to read the Haggadah, we tell the story, we taste the bitter leaves, and we celebrate the new day that dawned. People most familiar with the Exodus story through the image of Charlton Heston standing atop the rocks and commanding the sea to part. Unfortunately, you miss a powerful part of the story that way. This is another one of those many times when the book was better than the movie. In the Midrash of the Hebrew Bible, we're told the story of Nashon, who is a descendant of Judah and an ancestor of Jesus. The Israelites were fleeing Pharaoh's army, which was now almost right behind them. As they stood at the edge of the sea, there was no way to cross, and the people began to wail. And for most of us, we know that is the moment when Charlton steps to the edge of the cliff and the miracle happens. Now, shown in that place and in that time came with the people and knew that God would provide a way. And so into the water he walked. Feet, then knees, then hips, then chest. When the waters reached Nashon's lips, the sea began to part. And the Israelites escaped to safety on the other side. It took a demonstration of faith, of trust, of belief that there was yet hope. In the text, there's a miracle. In the text, there's also a truth. We don't always know how things are going to turn out. Life has uncertain outcomes. And sometimes we need to move forward just trusting that we're moving in the right direction, in the way that affirms more life. Sometimes we ourselves are called to be the courageous one, to be the first one into the water, called to be the first one to interrupt or intervene when harm is happening, knowing that you're following a sacred path, trusting that a way will then present itself. I can only imagine how the people upon the shore watched as one of the princes of the Judean line waded into that water. I wonder if, when the waters began to part, whether he was still the only one with his feet wet, or whether others had found their courage in his. The Passover story tells of keeping faith when all seems lost, of moving together out of darkness. It tells of the blessing of Dayenu, that each of our actions can be enough, that any of the gifts of God would have been enough. In returning to the Passover story and the Easter story both, I find myself reminded that beyond the miracles, the promised land wasn't immediately waiting. The Israelites who crossed the parted sea then wandered the desert for another 40 years on searching and seeking for that promised land. Liberated slaves still living very hard lives, full generations of seekers who knew only the wandering, who never got to see the fulfillment of the promise. And what does that mean to us? To be part of the wandering, part of the seeking, part of the moving toward, without knowing that we will receive the promise. The disciples of Jesus and the apostles did not suddenly find themselves with a growing and thriving church. In fact, they couldn't utter his name publicly or practice their faith because it carried a penalty of death for more than 100 years. I keep all of this in mind as I reflect on Easter. And I reflect on it partly in the ways on the ending of the pandemic. There's ways in which it feels to me like it was a wandering time, and that maybe we're still in a wandering time. Like maybe we're in the midst of a stalled resurrection. Maybe we're partway in and need to have faith that there is a resolution to come. There is more promise. There is something that is not what it was, but what it could be. There are uncertainties that remain. We don't know where that story will end. We don't know where our story ends. I remind myself that hope thrives when we step into the water, that possibilities abound in an empty tomb. When the stone is rolled away, there's a promise of a return to life. I don't know what I believe about the historical character of Jesus. As I said before, sometimes the truth of a story is not as important as the truth in the story. This morning, I was grateful to see a speech that I'd heard many years ago from a Sikh activist named Valerie Kaur, who's also a lawyer and an author, in which she preached the following. She says, "The mother in me asks, what if? What if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country that is waiting to be born? What if the story of America is one long labor? What if all of our grandparents are standing behind now, those who survived occupation and genocide, slavery, detentions, political assault? What if they are whispering in our ears, you are brave? What does the midwife tell us to do? Breathe. And then push. Because if we don't push, we will die. If we don't push, our community and our society will die. And tonight we will breathe. In this moment, we will celebrate joy and we will breathe. And tomorrow we will again labor in love. It is the love we show to one another, our revolutionary love, that will change the world for our children. And it's the magic we will show our children. And sometimes I think it is a miracle. She's talking about the United States, and I really don't care. She could be talking about Canada just as easily. She could be talking about anywhere where there are folks who are marginalized and oppressed and suffering. All of us need to breathe, and then we need to push again. Can I believe in Easter? Can I believe in the miracles of Passover? In many ways, I don't care. Because I do believe in the power of resurrection, of transformation. I believe in stories that tell us how to do that. And I know that as one of my deepest truths, that our human story doesn't end on Good Friday. It doesn't end with punishment. It doesn't end with fear. Easter will surely come. Standing up for those most vulnerable ends not in death and fear, but instead gives me hope and gives me life. And I need both. I need both desperately. I've seen folks take those first courageous steps who found the seas parting, making way for what they were always supposed to be. I've seen people witness to death and from that turn it into new life, renewed hope, transforming justice. I've seen people hold up their faith to the trials of hatred, doubt, and betrayal and emerge more firm in their conviction that all are worthy. In each and every one of our lives, we have risen again and again and again, and may we do so ever again, this day and every day. Blessed be. Amen. I invite you to rise in body or spirit, to rise in voice, to be sure, as we sing, or as I pass it off to Patrick, who's going to introduce the song.
Thank you. This is perhaps a completely new or just somewhat unfamiliar hymn, and I thank you, Reverend Christopher, for bringing this one. This is number 344, A Promise Through the Ages Rings. It's the melody is an old hymn called Was Gott. I can't speak German. Was Gott tut? I'm not sure. You might know it as When Mary Through the Garden Went, possibly. And I'll just tell you the fourth verse right now so that we can reflect on it. For something always, always sings. This is the message Easter brings. From deep despair and perished things, a green shoot always, always springs, and something always, always sings. So please rise as you're willing and able. I'll play through the entirety for an introduction, and then join me in singing. And thank you to the slide sharers. Finally done. We're going to sing now.
Now is the time in the service for up to 2 people to share what you've done recently for climate action. Your stories appear as leaves on our greening tree and on our website. I believe we have more than 50 leaves so far. Does anyone wish to tell their story today? Please come to the mic near the tree or raise your electronic hand on Zoom.
Is there anybody on Zoom who would like to share? If so, please either unmute yourself or raise your electronic hand.
I don't just love the sound of my own voice. Can I share one? Is that
Sure,
I mean,
yeah.
I know it's.
You can do it from here.
I have to admit, seeing in the service sheet something called the greening tree. I had no idea what it was or what was going to happen at this point in the service. But I think that's fantastic. Y'all are doing great. And this week, my children discovered how many of the vegetables in our fridge that when they're going bad, we can replant. And so there's a whole bunch of new things growing in our refrigerator right now. No. Yeah, you know what I meant. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, each step we take may be small, but it's one step towards the protection of Mother Earth. Now that we are both online and in the hall, we welcome your donations and pledges in 3 different ways. First, we have set up the Unitarian Fellowship bank account to automatically deposit e-transfers sent to info@ufon.ca. Second, you can write a check and pop it in the mail. Third, if you're in the hall, there's a basket in the back of the room where you can place your donation after the service. Our charity for April to June is Rainbow Railroad, a Canadian charitable organization that helps LGBTQ plus individuals escape violence and persecution in their home countries. If you would like to designate to the designated charity, please note that on your e-transfer or check. Otherwise, half the money in the basket will go to the designated charity. We are grateful for your offering. We're nearing the end of our service. After we sing Carry the Flame, you have the opportunity to join a social group. There are breakout rooms available online for the next 30 minutes, and in the hall, we'll be setting up for snacks and social time. Thank you for your participation today. There are no announcements today. To find out about all special events, groups, and meetings taking place in the fellowship, either go to the calendar on our website or read the weekly update email sent you on Thursdays.
I was just checking to see if you had any chocolate to share with you. But you're good? Okay. You say you're okay. Friends, I am grateful for this time that we got to spend together. I am grateful for all of the hard work that you do being community and caring for one another and caring for all of the people in your many varied worlds. I'm grateful for those among us who are storytellers and carry stories forward, stories that bring us life and invite us into new life and new possibilities. Folks who tell stories are blessings in our world. And as we depart this week, I offer to you these words from John Wesley. Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you ever can. May you go into this week in this world blessed and blessing. We hold you in our love. Thank you.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. We'll now join a circle, and Patrick will lead us in singing Carry the Flame.